February 4th, 2026. We're going to read chapter 15.5 in parts. It's a long chapter from page 1439 to 1525. Today going to be part 1. And these are ways of reflecting wisely. Sound analysis, reasoned analysis, wise reflection, yo niso mana sikara. Part 1, page 1439 to page 1451. A, investigations of causes and conditions, causality of yo niso mana sikara. B, analysis and component factors of yo niso mana sikara. C, reflection in line with universal characteristics of yo niso mana sikara. Part 1, beginning at page 1439. Buddha-dhamma, section 4, A Worthy Life, chapter 15, Wise Reflection, compiled by Somdet Prat Buddha Kosa Acharya, English name P.A. Payutto. 15.5. The ways of reflecting wisely here refers to the practical application of yo niso mana sikara. Although there are many methods for applying wise reflection, speaking technically, they are divided into two main categories. The first category is wise reflection, aiming directly at cutting off or elimination of avijja, ignorance. Second group, wise reflection, aiming at cutting off or reducing craving, tanha. Generally speaking, the first method is necessary for the final stages of the Dhamma practice because it gives rise to the understanding accords to truth, which is the requirement for awakening. The latter method is most often used during preliminary stages of practice, which is the purpose of building a foundation for sila, virtue, or cultivating sila, cultivating virtue, in order to be prepared for more advanced stages. This method is limited to subduing mental defilements, kilesas, and asavas, mental taints. Many methods of applying yo niso mana sikara, wise reflection, can be used for both benefits simultaneously, for eliminating ignorance, avijja, and reducing craving, tanha. The major or preliminary methods for applying wise reflection contained in the Tipitaka, the Pali Canon, can be classified as follows. 1, the method of investigating causes and conditions. 2, the method of analyzing component factors. 3, the method of reflecting in accord with the 3 universal characteristics, samana lakkhana. 4, the method of reflecting in accord with the 4 noble truths, reflection used to solve problems. 5th, the method of reflecting on the relationship between the goals, atta, and the principle, dhammas, of all things. 6th, the method of reflecting on the advantages and disadvantages of things and on the escape of them. 7th, the method of reflecting on the true and counterfeit value of things. 8th, the method of reflection in order to rouse wholesome qualities. 9th, the method of reflecting by dwelling in the present moment. And the 10th, The method of reflecting corresponding to analytic discussion, vibhajavata. 15.5a, investigations of causes and conditions. The method of investigating the causality of causes and conditions refers to the contemplation of a risen phenomenon in order to ascertain the truth, or to the contemplation of dilemmas in order to find a solution by examining various interrelated causal factors. It can also be described as the way of thinking in line with specific conditionality, ita pachayata in Pali, or according to the teaching on dependent origination, patisammupata. This is the fundamental form of yoniso manasikara, wise reflection. It is sometimes referred to when describing Gautama's Buddha's awakening. This form of reflection is not restricted to the beginning as at the results of then investigating the causes and conditions. In the way of thinking in line with specific continuality, it is also possible to begin with causes and trace its results, or to select any point in the middle of the process and then track either forwards to the end results or backwards to the source. In the Tipitaka, the Pali Canon, this form of yoniso manasikara, wise reflection, is described as follows. Reflections on mutual continuality. Here, a noble disciple reflects wisely on how all conditioned things are interdependent, enabling them to exist. Bhikkhu, it should be better for the uninstructed worldling to take this body composed of the four great elements as a self, but for him to take the mind as the self, it is truly unsuitable. For what reason? Because this body is composed of the four great elements is seen standing for 1 year, standing for 2 years, standing for 3, for 4, for 5, for 10, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, even 100 years, or even longer. But that which is called the mind, or mentality, or the consciousness, vinyan, arises as one thing and ceases as another, by day and by night. Bhikkhu, in regard to the collection of the great elements, the instructed noble disciple attends closely and carefully to dependent origination. Thus, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases also. Independence on basa, contact, acting as the basis for sukha, pleasant feelings, a pleasant feeling arises. With the cessation of phasa, contact, acting as the basis for pleasant feeling, that pleasant feeling arises. Dependent on contact ceases and subsides. Independence on contact, acting as the basis for painful feeling or painful feeling arises. With the cessation of contact, acting as basis for the painful feeling, that painful feeling ceases and subsides. Independence on contact, acting as the basis for neutral feeling, a neutral feeling arises. With the cessation of contact, acting as the basis for neutral feeling, that neutral feeling ceases and subsides. Bhikkhus, just as heat is generated and fire is produced from friction of two fire sticks, but with the separation and lying aside of one of the sticks, the resultant heat ceases and subsides. So too, independence on contact, acting as the basis for a pleasant feeling arises. With the cessation of that contact acting for the basis of pleasant feeling, that pleasant feeling arises dependent on contact, ceases and subsides. Second, inquisitive reflection, or the posing of questions. Examples are the following contemplation by Gautama Buddha. Then it occurred to me, when that exists, does upatana, clinging, come to be? By what is upatana, condition, clinging condition? Then through careful attention, I knew by way of panya, by applying my own wisdom, when there is craving, tanha, clinging, upatana, comes to be. Clinging, upatana, has tanha, craving, as its condition. Then it occurred to me, when that exists, does tanha, craving, come to be? By what is tanha, condition? Then through careful attention, I knew by way of applying panya, wisdom, when there is feeling, vedana, craving, tanha, comes to be. Craving, tanha, has vedana, feeling, as its condition. For more of this form of wise reflections, reflect on Chapter 4 on dependent origination. 15.5b, analysis of component factors of yoniso manasikara. The analysis of component factors, or the elaboration on specific subject matter, is another form of reflection which aims to generate an understanding of things as they truly are. This form of contemplation is most often used to recognize the true substantiality or selflessness of all things in order to give up upatana, clinging to conventions and destinations, samapati panyati. In particular, this refers to a contemplation of being or people as existing merely as a collection of assorted aggregates, skandhas, groups, sections, each of which exists dependent on subsidiary conditional factors. This form of reflection is conducive to seeing the selfless nature of things, anatta. A clear discernment of a selfless nature of things, however normal, requires the simultaneous participation by the previous kinds of reflection, investigative reflection, and or the following kind of reflection in accord with the three characteristics. Through careful analysis, one sees how the five skandhas, the five groups, are interdependent and subject to related causes and conditions. They are not truly independent. Moreover, these aggregates and conditional factors all proceed according to the natural laws. That is, they exist in a perpetual state that arises and decays. They are unstable, unenduring, and impermanent. If one is unable to accurately see this arising and ceasing of phenomenon, their conditionality, their oppression by various factors by way of investigative reflection described above, which can be a difficult task, one can reflect on these attributes as universal characteristics of all things, which is encompassed in the third kind of contemplation below. In the Tipitaka, the Pali Canon, the second kind of yoniso manasikara wise reflection is mentioned together with the third kind. Here, the commentaries, however, which says that are aligned with latter Atittama texts, prefer to distinguish this second kind of reflection. They classify it in the mode of detailed analysis, vibhaja viti. So an analysis of causes and condition according to the dependent origination is also considered a mode of a detailed analysis. Furthermore, They tend to begin with the basic analysis by focus on mentality and corporality, nama rupa, rather than immediately analyzing the five skandha, or the five groups, the five aggregates. This kind of reflection is not restricted to analyzing and distinguishing various factors, but also includes classification and categorization. The emphasis, however, is given on an analysis that is thus referred to vipaka, detailed analysis. In the traditional practice of insight meditation, vipassana meditation, as described in the commentaries, the basic analysis of mentality and corporality, nama rupa, is referred to as the analysis of mind and body, nama rupa vavatana, or contemplation of mind and body, nama rupa parikaha. It is sometimes called the division of mentality and materiality, or the divisions of arisen formations. Here, one does not look at people according to their conventional names and destinations of being them or us, Mr. A or Mrs. B. Instead, one sees them as a combination of physical and mental phenomenon. One determines each of the component factors in such a way. This is a material form. This is mind. Material form has these specific characteristics. Mental phenomenon have these specific characteristics. This factor has this kind of attribute and thus classified as form, while the factor has another kind of attribute and thus is classified as mind, citta. An analysis of human beings reveals only mind and body, or material and mental phenomenon. Having trained in such discernment or gaining skill of such reflection when encountering living beings and other objects, one will see them as simply a collection of mental and physical elements. They are merely natural phenomena, which are empty of any kind of true substance or a permanent self. One course of thinking helps to prevent one from being misguided or from overly attaching to conventional reality. Examples in the Dipitaka of the Pali Canon of this kind of reflections are as follows. Just as with an assemblage of parts, the word wagon is used, so when the groups of aggregates exist, there is the convention, a being. Friends, just when a space is enclosed by timber, twine, clay, and thatch, it comes to be called a house. So too, when a space is enclosed by bone, sinew, flesh, and skin, it comes to be called the body, rupa. Binku. Suppose that this river Ganges was carrying along a great lump of foam. A man with good sight would inspect it, examine it, and carefully investigate it. By inspecting it, examining it, and carefully investigating it, it would appear to him to be void, empty, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be a lump of foam? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of material form there is, whether past, future, or present, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, examines it, and carefully investigates it. By inspecting it, examining it, and carefully investigating it, it would appear to him to be void, empty, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a material form? Foam is like a lump of foam. Feeling is like a water bubble. So rupa is like the lump of foam. Vedana, feeling, is like the water bubble. Sanya, perception, is like the mirage. Sankhara, volitions, like a plantain trunk. And vijnana, consciousness, is like an illusion. So explain the kinsmen of the sun. However, one may consider and carefully investigate these 5 groups of aggregates, they are all but void and empty. 15.5c, reflection in line with universal characteristics of yoniso manasikara. Reflection in line with the universal characteristics or reflective discernment of natural truths refers to clear understanding of things as they are, an understanding of how things exist, must exist, according to their own nature. The focus of this reflection is on living beings and things that ordinary people are aware of, that is, conditioned things. Things arising from a shape by causes and conditions, subject to conditionality. One of these natural truths of the laws of impermanence, that all conditioned things, once they have arisen, must cease. They are inconstant, unstable, unenduring, and impermanent. Anicca vata sankhara. Likewise, all conditioned factors, both internal and external, perpetually arises and ceases. Their interaction with one another causes conflict and friction, which results in conditioned things being under stress, dukkha. They are unable to maintain an original state of existence. They are subject to alteration and disintegration. A truth which referred to as dukkha. The very natures of conditioned phenomenon means that they do not belong to anyone. They are not subject to anyone's wishes or desires. They cannot be truly owned or controlled by anyone. Similarly, they possess no soul or essence. Either internal or external, which is able to dictate or rule over them. They exist according to their own nature. They exist according to causes and conditions, not according to anyone's will. This is referred to the truth of non-self, anatta. The reflection here entails an acknowledgement of how all things one engages will exist equally as natural phenomenon. There are conditioned formation, existence dependent on conditional factors. The reflection in line with universal characteristics can be divided into 2 stages. The first stage includes a discernment and acknowledges of the truth. At this stage, one relates to things in harmony with nature. Such conduct is marked by wisdom and internal freedom. One is not bound by things. Even if one encounters unpleasant or undesirable circumstances, one is able to reflect on how these things or these situations proceed in line with natural course and exist according to causes and conditions. By thinking in this way, one begins to accept one's situation. One is consequently releasing from suffering, or at that very least one's suffering abates. When one possesses greater mental agility, what all needs to do in such challenging situation is to establish mindfulness. Call to the mind, I will see things according to the truth, not how I want them to be. By doing this, one's suffering will cease immediately, because one begins to be released. One does not subject oneself to stress. Indeed, one does not create a sense of self that is subject to stress. The second stage includes managing and resolving things in line with causal factors. Here one acts with insight, acts with wisdom, and acts with freedom. When one acknowledges the conditional nature of things, one wishes for things to be a particular way. One studies and understands the causes and conditions required for such things to reach the desired results. One then acts and deals with things in their specific conditional factors. When one fulfills the necessary conditions, irrespective of whether one desires the results or not, it will occur automatically. If these necessary conditions are lacking, similarity, the results will fail. Regardless of one's desires, one deals with things by way of knowledge in line with conditional factors, not through willpower or desire. In terms of Dhamma practice, the practice of the law, the universal law that is, all one needs to do is acknowledge one wishes, determine the relevant causes and conditions, and then deal with the matter at the point of these conditional factors. By practice in this way, one extricates oneself from problems. One is not bound. One does not allow one's desire to lead into oppression. One does not allow one's desire to create a fixed sense of identity. One both acts directly in line with causes and conditions and allow things to proceed according to such causes and conditions. This way of practice is both the most effectual and it's also free from suffering, dukkha. The second stage of reflection in line with the universal characteristic is related to the fourth kind of reflection described below. That is, the fourth kind of reflection takes over from the third. In the traditional practice of vipassana, insight development, which was developed in the formal system described in the commentaries and the teaching of the seven forms of purity, Visuddhi, is used as a master template. In the Rata Vinita Sutra. In this context, the commentaries use the list of different forms of knowledge, nana, described in the Patisampattimagga as a set of criteria, and maintain the basic contemplation of phenomenon of separating them into mind and body, nama rupa. According to this teaching, the dependent development of insight is set down as a system containing clearly defined progressive steps. The three kinds of reflection mentioned so far are included in this system, in which they are combined into a distinct group of affiliated methods of reflection. In order in which they are presented, however, differs from the order presented above. The first step entails analytical reasoning or investigation into component factors. Method 2, described above. Here one distinguishes between mental and material phenomena. One determines what is mind and what is body. What is the different kinds of material and mental phenomena? What sorts of attributes are distinct phenomenon possesses? This step is referred to as contemplation of name and form, nama-rupa parikaha, analysis of name and form, nama-rupa vatana, divisions of name and form, nama-rupa paticheta, divisions of formations, sankhara paricheta. It is classified as purity of views, ditti visuddhi, the third of the seven kinds of purity. The objective here, however, is preliminary on understanding and distinguishing phenomenon, or understanding and distinguishing the component parts. To know which things one encounters are comprised of materiality and which are comprised of mentality, rather than emphasizing analysis in general. In layman terms, just to separate it from which one is the form and which one is the mind. To identify what are the characteristics and identifying factors of each of them, what kind of qualities they possess and not possess. The second step entails an investigation of conditionality. Method 1, described above. Here one searches for, contemplates the causes and conditions of material and mental phenomenon in various ways. To contemplate in line with the teaching of dependent origination, to contemplate ignorance, craving, grasping, volitional form actions of karma and nourishment, to contemplation in accord with cognitive processes, how the I consciousness depends on the I in material forms, to contemplate according to the psycho-volitional actions of karma and the results of vipaka. All these contemplations are part of the contemplation of the Patisamupata, dependent originations. They simply separate and highlight different aspects of this teaching. This step just refers to the contemplation and the conditions of name and form. Nama rupa pachaya parikaha, or in short, the analysis of conditions. Pachaya parikaha. When this contemplation is complete, it gives rise to an understanding referred as knowledge of the relationship of things. Dhamma titi nana. Knowledge according to reality. Yata putanana. Right vision. Sammadasana. This step is classified as purity of knowledge leading to the end of doubt. Kanhavi taranavi suti. The fourth of the 7 kinds of purity. The third step entails a thorough understanding of nature, or the reflection in line with universal characteristics. Method 3, described above. One contemplates namarupa, mind and body, conditioned phenomenon, according to the teaching of the Tilakkhana, anikatata, dukkhatata, anattata. The 3 characteristics. One sees things as impermanent, unstable, anicca, subject to stress and conditioned factors, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. They do not exist in dependent entities or as independent entities. They are ultimately insubstantial. They cannot be truly owned by anyone or controlled by way of desire. This step is referred to as investigative knowledge, sammasanana. It is the beginning of purity of knowledge regarding the path and not the path. Magga nana dasana visuddhi. The 5th of the 7 kinds of purity. The following passages of the Tipitaka of the Pali Canon describes the joint application of the 2nd and the 3rd kinds of reflection mentioned above, the method of analyzing component factors, and the method of reflecting in accord with universal characteristics. Bhikkhu, attend carefully, yoniso manasikara, to form, and recognize the impermanence of form as it really is. Bhikkhu, attend carefully to Vedana, feeling, and recognize the impermanence of feeling as it really is. Bhikkhu, attend carefully to Sanya, perception, and recognize the impermanence of perception as it really is. Bhikkhu, attend carefully to Sankhara, volitional formation, and recognize the impermanence of volitional formation as they really are. Bhikkhu, attend carefully to Vijnana, consciousness, and recognize the impermanence of consciousness as it really is. As instructed, Bhikkhu should carefully attend to the 5 groups of skandhas, subject to clinging, upatana, as impermanence, as oppressed by conditioned factors, as anatta, non-self, or the classification of not finding ownership in it. The following passages is an investigation of continuality combined with reflection in line with universal characteristics. The subjects of this joint contemplation is to gain thorough understanding of reality, to recognize mental freedom, and to be free from dukkha, suffering, stress, agitation. Bhikkhu, dwell with yourself as a sanctuary, with yourself as a refuge, with no other refuge, with the eternal law of Dhamma as the sanctuary, with the universal law of Dhamma as refuge, with no other refuge. When you dwell with yourself as a refuge, with the universal law of Dhamma as a refuge, with no other refuge, you should reflect wisely. Thus, for what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair born? What is their source? Bhikkhu, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair born? What is their source? Here, the uninstructed worldling do not associate with the noble ones, and the unskilled and undisciplined in their law of Dhamma, who does not associate with superior person, is unskilled, undisciplined in their Dhamma, regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. The form of this changes and alters. When the change of alteration of form, there arise in him sorrow. There arise in him lamentation. There arise in him pain. There arise in him grief. And ultimately arise in him despair. In regard to Vedana, feeling as self, sanya as self, sankhara as self, vijnana as self, when the change and alteration of vijnana, there arise in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, ultimately. But a bhikkhu who understood the impermanence of form, of feeling, of perception, of volitional formations of consciousness in its changeability as its termability, and when he sees it really is with correct panya, thus in the past and also now, as a form of feeling, perception, volitional formation, consciousness is impermanent, subject to stress, the nature to change, then he abandons sorrow, he abandons lamentation, he abandons pains, he abandons grief, and ultimately abandons despair. With their abandonment, he does not alarm, be frightened. Unafraid, he dwells happily. A bhikkhu who dwells happily is said to be quenched in that respect. That's the end of part 1 of page 1451, chapter 15.5, Wise Reflection.